Hi, Writing Center Consultants. This is Aaron Leff, one of your fellow consultants and English 122 instructors. Julie Voss has asked me to make a quick screencast to tell you about the final project that students from my English 122 and Michelle Medeiros' 122 are working on in the final stretches of the semester. And hopefully this will help you with their assignment. So what we are asking our students to do is write 3 short arguments within a bigger paper. Essentially what we're asking them is to think about taking a topic and writing it from 3 different perspectives, 3 different stakeholders in a particular conversation. So it could be anything from immigration to tariffs to questions about the use of, which seems to be pretty popular, social media and how it affects people. So instead of the traditional 10-page argument where students have a thesis that they prove and refute counter-arguments for 10 pages, we are asking our students to create what we call a room for debate. What that means is that they provide a brief introduction that is an objective introduction that explains the conversation. They have 3 short arguments, probably 2 to 3 pages each, that are both documented and have citations at the end of each argument, and a conclusion that kind of summarizes the conversation as is now and reflects on what's the next thing that this conversation should entail. It's really, at the end of the day, it's not much different than the typical research paper, although we are asking our students to think about the different ways someone might approach and talk about an issue like immigration or tariffs. And so what I'll do now is, and Julie has sent this out to the rest of you, is the explanation. So from an outline perspective, again, like it has the topic and perspectives. It just has a introduction to the topic and should end with a question that each of the perspectives address. So here we see examples. These are, again, like this should be pretty familiar to you in terms of these are like short arguments. So they're probably about, 700 to 1,500 word arguments. But even though it's all in one document, we have different perspectives within that. And then at the end, they should have an overarching conclusion. Just basically, like I said, like what's being talked about now, what are these perspectives, and maybe also what is the next step in this conversation. To give you some context for this assignment, I'm going to show you first where we discussed taking this assignment from is the New York Times Room for Debate. So if you go to New York Times and search Room for Debate, you will see that there are several issues. And so if you look at this is a professional model, obviously, where there is this sense of an objective introduction that talks about this issue of identity, and then asks the question, is criticism of political correctness and identity politics a reaction that's long overdue or just racist? So then within this bigger essay, right, we have some different, what they call debaters, we would call perspectives. And so different people arguing from different points of view based on their expertise, whether they're conservative, whether they're law professors, whether they're cultural professors, literature professors, etc. So what we are essentially doing is asking our students to take on a perspective of a either academic discipline, an interest group, maybe a practice such as law or medicine, and try to make an argument in that conversation having to do with their topic at hand. As an example, I will just show you what a student produced, and I will send this out as a link with the email to Julie so she could share it with you if you're interested or want to know more. So I had a student who did his he was interested in solar renewable energies. That was his career path. And so what he wanted to do is, and at the time was teaching, the trade tariffs were imposed on China, which definitely affected the solar panel industry, as we import a lot of solar technology from China. So if you see here, he creates a broad introduction on this homepage here, just talking about what happened, why is this conversation important. And then he adds some different perspectives. So one perspective he added was that how the tariffs are going to hurt an already divided access to renewable technology. And in here he talks about how solar panels are only available to those who could afford it, which leaves some of the poorer communities behind. And so he talked about like what needs to be done. If you see here, we must seek and demand that our energy equality and demand must be met. So he's clearly writing from a social activist point of view. So he's talking about like he's rallying his troops, so to speak. So his purpose is to talk about to bring more statistics or more to the conversation about how rich and poor are divided in renewable energies, and that it's a call to action for probably his base in terms of other people who would be in the environmental movement, whether it be Sierra Club or Greenpeace or more local advocacy groups. The next perspective he took on was actually another environmental perspective, but this one was talking about like why these tariffs were good. And in this, he talks about how the way we transport solar panels from China is actually hurting the environment. So again, he's bringing kind of an awareness of to the environmental industry about like, while we want these things, here are some problems that exist within it. So in terms of like, and he talked about how the ships that brought the solar panels over were actually contributing to ocean pollution. And if we look at his final perspective was that from a farmer who talked about how these tariffs would affect his soybean products. So again, while it doesn't directly deal with solar panels, it does show how this topic affected farmers. And so he makes the argument basically saying that this person did support Trump, but now has to reconsider because of how this policy hurt his position. And then at the end, we ask our students to write just a general conclusion, just like in terms of like synthesize those different perspectives, and then really ask the question, what's next? And in this, I know talking with this student, he was really concerned about how does global policy affect environmental relationships and the ability to access renewable resources. So again, this is just a model. Julie does have copies of this at the front desk in the Writing Center, so if you need help with that, go ahead and look at it. Otherwise, feel free to email Michelle or myself, and we can talk you through any questions you have about how best to help your students. Thanks so much for listening.